So I was right about the earring. I was definitely right about the earring thing. Um, I was wrong about a lot else, though. I did not see the end of this book coming. I feel like the Mistborn trilogy so far is maybe the series which has been the least predictable in terms of being able to even guess what the next book is going to be about. Um, like after the first book, I had a vision of what the second book would be about and sort of what it would be dealing with, and I was very wrong. And after the second book, I again thought I had an idea of what the third book would be about, and I was a bit closer, like I guessed it would be dealing with the apocalypse and the end of the world and ruin, obviously. That's not really a guess, that's kind of obvious based on the ending of the second book. But I really didn't expect it to be almost entirely dealing with, like, well, first of all, I didn't expect it to be dealing with the Khandra as much. I didn't expect it to be almost entirely set in Urto and Fadrex, two brand new locations. And I certainly could never have expected that ending. Um, that said, I am thrilled so far. I'm thrilled by this book in almost every way. I do have criticisms, which I'm not going to go into my old criticisms, but I am going to talk about the stuff in this part that bothered me. But overall, I just want to say that the climax of the main story was fantastically handled. Um, the reveals were extremely satisfying. The reveal of what the Khandra's contract with the Lord Ruler entails, their sort of mass self-destruct thing. Um, the plot twist of Sazed being God. I mean, the book actually says that. It's outright says that Sazed is God now. So that's interesting. Um, so overall, I don't have a lot of thoughts about the actual climax of the book beyond it being really good. However, I am going to take a moment to talk about some of the issues I have here. One, there is a continuing weirdness with how Sanderson handles issues of gender sometimes. And one of the interesting ways in which this is illustrated is that in this whole section, there is a lot of talk about the pronouns used in the prophecies to refer to the hero of ages, and how there is some ambiguity there, how the prophecies use the ancient Terrace gender-neutral pronoun uh, to refer to the hero, and what this could mean. And there are two problems with this. One, English has a gender-neutral pronoun. It's always had a gender-neutral pronoun. When you don't know someone's gender, you say they. However, this book does not refer to the hero of ages as they. It consistently uses he pronouns when talking about the hero in the abstract, not a particular specific candidate for hero. And this even applies to Sazed. Sazed, literally in the paragraph in which he talks about the prophecies insisting on the gender-neutral pronoun, literally in the next sentence, he refers to the hero as he. This is weird. I don't know what to make of this other than, I guess, Brandon Sanderson has issues with the, like, centuries old use of the singular they for a person whose gender is unclear. I don't know. Um, I have no idea. It can't be a purposeful political statement because there was no controversy around using singular they when this book was written. Like, today, if I saw this, I would assume that Brandon Sanderson was making some kind of, like, transphobic statement about not supporting non-binary people or something. But he can't be, because this was written in, like, what, 2007 or something? So I don't know why he does this. It's just really awkward having all this talk about how the hero is always referred to by the gender neutral pronoun, but then him. See, I just said him again. I'm doing a Sanderson. But then they are never actually referred to with the gender neutral pronoun in the text of the book. That is strange to me. That's not really necessarily even a political criticism, it's just a writing criticism. It's just a weird inconsistency. It would have been much better if, instead of Sazed constantly talking about how the hero is gender neutral in the prophecy, we simply actually got the text of the prophecies and could see for ourselves that there is a gender neutral pronoun there. So, okay, but that's not the end of the issue with the whole gender neutral thing, because of course the reveal at the end is that the hero is referred to as gender neutral because the person who will be the hero is neither fully a man nor fully a woman, referring to Sazed. That is a terrible thing to say. Sazed is a man. There is no ambiguity about Sazed's gender at any point. He's just been castrated. That doesn't make him, like, gender neutral. What are you talking about? I hate that particular aspect of the reveal here. So I'm choosing to interpret that as not the actual reason why the gender-neutral pronoun is used in the prophecies. I'm choosing to interpret that as Sazed's post hoc justification, because Sazed himself constantly questions his own masculinity, which is something that really isn't explored in this book now that I think about it. That's actually interesting. Like, the previous books had a lot of, like, oh, I'm not a real man stuff from Sazed. And I thought that was gonna turn into, like, a character arc. But then it never did. So we're back to one of the things I said earlier in this trilogy, which is that Brandon Sanderson is very uncomfortable, I think, questioning masculinity in a way that he is much more comfortable questioning femininity. Female characters get to sort of have arcs that have to do with their gender and with coming to terms with their gender, whereas male characters never seem to struggle with this, and even when a character like Sazed sort of begins to show signs of struggling with it, it's kind of dropped by the third book and never resolved. So it's weird. I'm hoping that in a future book I might see a male Sanderson character have feelings about gender similar to, say, Vin's or Serene's, but I'm not really holding my breath. I'm getting the feeling that that's just not something Sanderson is interested in exploring. So that's my big criticism there. I have another small criticism about the ending. So at the end, Sazed basically remakes the entire world because he's God now, and he does so using knowledge from his copper mines. This is like the advantage he has over someone like Vin, or Rashek for that matter, who who gained the full power of preservation, but without all this knowledge, and so they couldn't do it quite right, and they kept screwing things up, like moving the planet too far or too close to the sun. But my issue is, the book really insists that Sazed got all of his knowledge from religions, and it's just kind of forced. Like, yeah, okay, I'm sure there's some religion that had knowledge on plant life that you could use, or knowledge on astronomy that you could use. But you have the combined knowledge of all the Terrace Keepers, which is not just about religions. Surely, somewhere in your Coppermind, there is a book on astronomy you could use instead of referring to an ancient religion. Or a book on botany you could use instead of referring to an ancient religion. It struck me as a bit of a forced way to make the whole, like deliver the book's message about religion, because Sanderson is clearly very invested in showing that religion is good and important. And I know he believes this. I've read his essay on why he himself is a Mormon, and I actually strongly recommend it. It's as religious essays go, as essays on religion rather go, that is a very good one, and a very nuanced one, and very interesting to read. And I think having read that essay actually really informs how I read his books, and I can sort of see why he writes religion the way he does, especially here in Mistborn, but also in Elantris. But that doesn't really work here. Here it feels forced. The parts of this section which focus on religion as a source of hope, religion as a motivational force, are good. That works. That is something you can ascribe to religion. Religion as a source of scientific knowledge about the world? No. That just doesn't scan for me. Especially not from a character who also has access to actual scientific knowledge. Like, we know he does. He built a whole, like, dam system earlier in this book, using knowledge of, like, physics and mechanics and stuff that he has in his copper mines. So he has, like, science stuff in his copper mines. And it's weird that he relies on religion for this. And while I was reading that, my thought process was, wouldn't it be hilarious if he failed and destroyed the world because he was relying on, like, bad information about the stars and plants and stuff? But no, apparently all the information from all the religions is perfect, and it let him create a perfect world. Which, again, I love the ending, I just wish it hadn't focused on specifically the religions and more just on generally the knowledge in his copper mines. It just felt like a forced moral at the end of the story. Which does actually make me wonder one thing. The new world that Sazed creates, is every flower in it identical? Like, do all flowers look the same? Because Sazed has exactly one flower to work off of as a model, which is Mare's drawing. And as far as I know, he doesn't have knowledge of what flowers look like in his copper mines. So, I guess there's a world full of identical flowers now. bit of a absence of diversity in the plant life, I imagine. I don't think Sanderson will do that. I'm sure when I get to Mistborn Era 2, it'll turn out that there's all sorts of flowers, but I just can't help thinking that realistically there would only be one kind of flower. So I am going to go back to the question of Mistborn Era 2 at the end, but first I have just a couple of minor things to talk about here. So, one, the Kandra being the descendants of the original Terrace Keepers, specifically via the Mistrates, which is and the Mistrates being what all Feruchemists turned into, is interesting. Does not answer the question of how Mistrates procreate, which apparently they do. I am wondering about the current state of the Kandra and also of the Koloss and also of Marsh. Unless I missed something, which is possible I did. I kind of read this in a bit of a fevered state, so it's possible I missed a sentence somewhere, but I don't think we really know what happened to Marsh. Like, he was alive last time we saw him, I'm pretty sure. He killed Elend, and Elend wounded him, but then the wound just healed. So Marsh is fine. So is he still around? Is he just the one remaining Inquisitor? Or did Sazed, erase him from existence when he became God? Likewise, the Koloss. There were still a bunch of Koloss alive, and apparently they were fine despite Ruin's death. Ruin's death did not automatically kill all the hemalurgic creatures. So, are there still Koloss around? Did Sazed make them human again somehow? What's going on there? Third, there's still Kandra alive. Elend and Sazed and Elend's men stopped a bunch of Kandra who didn't take their spikes out from delivering the ATM to Ruin, and it said that they broke their bones. But we know that breaking bones does not kill a Kandra. In fact, we know that really humans basically can't kill Kandra. So those Kandra were still alive last we saw them. As were the Mistrates, who used to be the other Kandra. Are those still around? I don't know if this will be answered in the sequel books, because the sequel books take place 300 years later or something, I believe. So I'm hoping that there are still Kandra and Mistrates and Koloss around, because I feel like these are very interesting creatures and there's maybe still more stories to be told with them, especially the Kandra. Which, by the way, surely the nice thing for everyone to do now that Ruin is dead would be to take all the spikes that the Kandra pulled out of themselves and just stick them back in to give the Kandra back their sapience? Or are we not doing that? Are we just leaving them as mindless Mistrates for no reason now, because there's no longer any risk of them being controlled by Ruin if they have the spikes? Maybe the spikes no longer work. Maybe hemalurgy no longer functions without Ruin. I'm not sure. Anyway, just a little thought I had. Now, there's two clever things I like here. One, there was the line, when Sazed was realizing that he's the hero, there was the line about how the hero would bear something, the future of humanity, on his arms. And I actually remember that line from, I think, the second book. I think it was the second book, maybe even earlier in this one, but I do remember that line, and I remember being like, that's very specific phrasing. And I did actually have the thought of copper mines, mostly because that's where the Lord Ruler had his ferrochemical bracelets, like on his upper arms. And I did actually have the thought, is that referring to those? Does and like my thought there was, what if the Hero of Ages has to be a feruchemist? Like, what if there's a link between feruchemy and the Hero of Ages? Um, that didn't end up being the case, but he was a feruchemist nonetheless, Sazed. So that was a very clever little bit of foreshadowing. I like that. The other thing I noticed is we don't really get a confirmation of how Ruin influenced Rashek while he was the Lord Ruler, but we also don't need one. Now, Rashek, as far as we can tell, was not insane. He was not particularly mentally unstable, so the whole Ruin can influence mentally unstable people thing doesn't necessarily apply. However, Rashek, rather famously, had a lot of metal stabbed into his body, like 24/7, much like Vin with the earring. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's how Ruin was influencing him. That said, Ruin's influence on Rashek is a weird element because it's kind of used to redeem Rashek, I feel like, in this book. And there's even a line towards the end of the book where I think Sazed or someone says that Rashek was a good man. No? We're back to the issue of Yomen being called a good man. No. No one involved in the Lord Ruler's regime could ever be a good person. Least of all the Lord Ruler. Because of what they were doing to the Ska. And you cannot blame everything on Ruin's influence with Rashek, because surely Ruin's influence happened over many years after he became the Lord Ruler. And we know that during the very brief moments after he entered the well, like during the few moments when he had godlike power, that is when he did the following. He created the Colossus. He created the Inquisitors. He divided humanity into a lesser slave race and a greater master race, and he like genetically modified them as such. He turned every feruchemist on Earth into a mindless mistwraith just so they couldn't threaten his power. So, no, Rashek was not a good person before Ruin's influence. He was a monster and a tyrant. And the fact that the book seems weirdly hesitant to say this is weird to me, because Rashek's character is perfectly consistent. Rashek was a terrible person, a petty, self-interested tyrant who was also very intelligent and very invested in the survival of the world, and made preparations to preserve the Earth. Not the Earth, whatever this planet is called. And I feel like maybe Sanderson feels like there's a... like, this is impossible. Like, he can't be both of these things. He can't be both the genius who planned the survival of the world and the petty, tyrannical, horrible fascist. But he can. That's actually a perfectly coherent character. There's no contradiction there. Nothing there requires you to soften his evil. In fact, the fact that he was a fascist tyrant, but also the man who made the plan to save the world, makes him so much more interesting and compelling. So I'm choosing to ignore everything in this book that seems to imply that Rashek was a good person, because he wasn't. He was a monster, and he saved the world. That's the point. Which I feel like the book misses its own point there a bit. So, let's go back to sort of interesting things I noticed. One interesting thing I noticed is that ruin and preservation are said to have created humanity in the form of that which they had seen before. This is a very interesting line. It makes me think that that's probably a Cosmere thing. I'm guessing that there's a world out there in the Cosmere on which there were, like, the original humans, and then all these other worlds, which seem to all have humans on them, like the humans on all the other worlds, were maybe created in the image of the original humans. Or maybe not even the original humans, maybe the original gods. Because we see when both ruin and preservation die, that they manifest as human men. Like there's a human body that pops out of the mists and falls over dead when Vin kills Ruin. Like a red-haired guy. Like, that's interesting. That means that maybe these are like the natural forms of these gods. I'm guessing that as I go through the Cosmere, it'll turn out that all of these worlds have their own gods, but these gods are all, like, were all once part of one group. Like, maybe all the worlds were one, and then they split or something. And then the gods that got assigned to each world were the ones who created the humans on that world or something. I don't know enough about the overarching Cosmere cosmology just yet to make that claim, though. So that's just a guess right now. So the other interesting Cosmere thing here is Hoid. We never got any closure on Hoid in this trilogy. At the end of Elantris, we got like the huge reveal of Hoid. We had like a whole chapter of like epilogue chapter of Hoid doing like ominous stuff hinting at the Cosmere. And I kind of expected that at the end of this book, but it didn't happen. Overall, Mistborn is much more self-contained than Elantris, kind of ironically, because Elantris is the standalone novel and Mistborn is a series, but yeah, it's actually more self-contained than Elantris was. It makes Mistborn better on its own, but I did kind of like the Hoid reveal at the end of Elantris. It was one of the more memorable parts of that book. So I did kind of look forward to another hint at the larger fabric of things in this book, which I didn't get. But that's fine. I'm getting pretty close to the Stormlight Archive, which, as far as I know, is where the most like Cosmere stuff happens. So I'm sure I will get a lot of I will get my fill of Cosmere stuff soon. Yeah, I think that's about it for my thoughts on this ending. Overall, the first Mistborn trilogy, I really, really enjoyed. All three of these books are excellent. All three are much better than Elantris. I do think that the first book, The Final Empire, is still my favorite. Both Mistborn book and Sanderson book in general that I've read so far. And the other two are slightly less good for me personally, because I feel like some of the values and political implications of them are a bit messier. The first book was very clear in its intention. It was very clear where it stood on the issues it was about, and it didn't waffle about stuff. The second and third book are weaker in that respect. You do not get the feeling that Sanderson is as willing to commit to any position on any of the issues he raises in these books. And it's more just a sort of, ooh, I will present different sides, and who knows what's right. Which is fine. I just, it's a bit annoying sometimes. when I feel like there's a clear, correct answer, such as in the question of, was Rashek a good person? No! But despite that, it's a really strong trilogy, I think, and it doesn't lose momentum like a lot of trilogies do. It doesn't. The second book doesn't really suffer as much from middle entry syndrome, middle book syndrome. Um, it is in itself a self-contained story with a satisfying climax and conclusion and a sort of arc throughout it. My biggest disappointments with the trilogy are probably that, besides the political stuff, probably that that Zane died too soon. I feel like the character of Zane had a lot more potential to him, and I'm still kind of weirded out by his death. I think that Marsh and Zane should have switched roles. I think that Zane should have been the sort of main representative of Ruin's forces struggling against Ruin's control in the third book, rather than Marsh. Just because Zane was actually a developed character, whereas Marsh kind of wasn't. But that's fine. That's a small nitpick. As for what the future holds, I will not be reading Mistborn Era 2 yet. I will be reading, I will be reading something else that isn't Sanderson for next. You'll see what. But I shall also be reading Warbreaker next within the Cosmere. That's definitely the next thing I'm reading in the Cosmere. And then after that, we'll see. I'm still not sure what order I'm going to do Stormlight Archive and Mistborn Era 2 in, because they're kind of interwoven in terms of release order, and I'm not sure I want to read, like, one Stormlight book, then one Mistborn book, then one Stormlight book, then one Mistborn book. But that might be the best way to do it, because I'm guessing that the overarching Cosmere stuff is kind of written to be read in release order. I'll see. I'll see when I get there. I've still got a bit of time to think about that. But for now, I will give some predictions, not for the Cosmere, because I still don't know anything about that, but I will give some predictions for Mistborn Era 2. So, I think the plot of Mistborn Era 2 probably won't have anything to do with Mistborn Era 1. I'm guessing that, well, I'm not guessing, it's 300 years in the future. Everyone is definitely dead. Like, I can't imagine there will be any significant character overlap between the two. I can't really think, actually I can't think of any characters who might overlap, because the only immortal characters we have really are the Kandra, and they're mostly dead. Or all dead? Still unclear. Marsh, likewise, may be alive, or may be dead. Like I said, unclear. But he could still be around, I guess. 300 years in the future. Spook will definitely be dead. Ham, Breeze, Olrian, all these characters, there's no way they'll be alive. So I'm guessing that we're dealing with a whole new cast of characters and a whole new plot. It has to be a whole new plot because Ruin is dead. So there's really no room for any continuation of the plot of this trilogy, which I'm happy about. I'm glad that this one is very definitively over. I could be wrong. Maybe he'll find a way to continue it, but I think that Mistborn Era 2 will really be very much its own thing with minimal connection to the original trilogy. I know that the Mistborn Era 2 books are shorter than the Mistborn Era 1 books, and I know that they are very different. They are often, like, a lot of people who really like Era 1 don't like Era 2, and there are some who feel the opposite. Now, I don't know how I'll feel, obviously, but from what I've seen people talk about when it comes to Era 2, from how people describe the differences, I suspect I might like Era 2 quite a bit. if the quality, of course, is still the same level. So yeah, that's a little glimpse into my predictions for the future. I don't really know what the plot could be about, so I'm not even gonna guess. I'm just guessing what it's not gonna be about, i.e., anything from this book. And yeah, see you next time when I talk about something that isn't a Sanderson book. Bye.